Welcome to Younger Older. I'm Dave Wager, your host here in the studios at Silver Birch Ranch on the campus of the Nicolet Bible Institute. Once again, I'm with Jeremy. He is the author of a book entitled The Pursuit of Safety, and it has to do with the theology of safety. So if you didn't listen to our last program, we kind of talked about theology and safety.
We did.
Yes. And Jeremy is the president of the Nicolet Bible Institute. And we invite all of you that are listening to this particular podcast to go check that out at nicoletbibleinstitute.org. And you can come up, and Jeremy teaches a class or two or three or four, and I teach a couple. And so if you enjoy the podcast, we ask you to come and give us a chance to talk to you all year long about who God is and learning to serve together. And it's a thrill to be a part of that. Now, this is what year for you up here working on this?
This is my third year. It's the beginning of my third year here at NBI.
Okay. And you also teach classes at Wheaton?
Teach classes at Wheaton College, yep.
You do that online?
Mostly online. I occasionally travel down and teach an intensive class. Yeah.
Okay. And you have done other colleges too where you've taught?
Moody Bible Institute is the other school that I taught at.
Okay.
Taught back in 7 or 8 years ago now, maybe that long. Taught some theology there.
Yeah, well, I enjoy your background because I think you've got an educational background. You've been in education yourself with master's degree, doctorate degree.
Yes.
You've also been a missionary.
Yes.
And where did you and your wife go?
So my wife Casey and I were missionaries in Kazakhstan. That was a long time ago. That was about 2002 to 2004 with Crew. So we were working with college students. We taught English, started Bible studies, did evangelism and discipleship with students there. Wonderful 2 years of our life. Really enjoyed it.
And you've also been a youth pastor.
Yes, yeah. So when we came home from Kazakhstan, I was a youth pastor for a number of years. It's actually at the church that I was at as a college student in Flagstaff, Arizona. So great church, wonderful privilege to be there working with junior high and high school students.
Yeah, well, the fun I see is, Jeremy, you as a president of Nicolet Bible Institute, you bring all these things together for people. And when you talk, you're able to interweave those thoughts and ideas from various parts of life. And I think that's a valuable thing for our students to have.
It is. Sometimes you wonder, God takes you in various directions. You're doing this, you're doing that. And sometimes you wonder, how do all these things fit together? What am I doing with all of them? And so, yeah, if you're younger and you're wondering, what does this piece of my life have to do with that piece of my life? It's encouraging, this Dave, as you get older, you see that those lessons you learn, the things God has you doing, those aren't wasted, that He has purposes for them. No,
I actually encourage all the young men that I mentor to see the importance of getting up every day, to looking for God's plan for that day, to ask God, what do I need to accomplish today? Who do I need to see? And actually look at people in the eye, and when you look at them before you do anything else, pray and ask God, what can I do to help this person be who they should be? It may be nothing. You may need to walk by them. It may not be God's plan for you. But the fun part is to know that God is working in each of our lives to develop us into the person He wants us to be. And as we do that, then He gives us these opportunities, and we look back on it and say, wow, I couldn't have prepared myself better for that, but God did it. And because you're just listening to Him. Yes. It takes the pressure off, actually.
And have you ever noticed that, God He's preparing us for the future, and then at some point you get old enough and you realize, not only is my past preparation for the future, but enough years have gone by that the past is now who I am.
Right.
I used to have that mindset of, I'm doing this, I'm doing that, I'm preparing for the future. And then at some point I had to turn around and look and say, this is who I am. I'm a man who has done these things, who lives my life in this way, who's done certain things like that. So,
and I'm at a different stage of life than you, and I keep thinking one of the most important things I can do is just help young people understand what I learned.
Yes.
That's it. I just want to, this is what I learned. They can take it or they can leave it, but I get the chance to say, here's what I've understood in life. Not necessarily because of all book learning either.
Right.
It's because I'm as old as the guys I mentor now. I'm as old as their grandparents. So it's one of those things where you're meeting with them. I'm as old as your dad, probably. And I'm in that category.
Yes.
Anyway. So, but your book, you've written The Pursuit of Safety, and it's an intriguing title. The idea of how safe do we need to be? How much? I think this is a tension I've had all my life anyway. How much do you trust in medicine, and how much do you trust in God?
Yeah.
Now I know the theological answer to that.
Right. And what is that answer, Dave? I'd like to know.
Well, you trust in God. That's the simple
Okay,
thing.
okay.
I mean, that's the answer.
Yes.
But as I look at it, I go, well, why do we have vaccines then?
Yes.
I mean, that's the question in my head. It's like, is it wrong to take care of your health, but yet you realize God is ultimately in charge of your health?
Yeah.
So how do I balance this? I mean, is this addressed in your book at all?
It is, and one of the things that's interesting is as I was writing this, when I first started using the phrase "the pursuit of safety" or "pursuing safety," I meant it with a negative connotation, as in safety is something that so many people in our world are grasping at, striving after, pursuing, in a vain sort of way, because you think about safety and it's something that you never quite fully attain because there's always new risks that can come about. You can perfectly control a situation, but how long can you maintain that control?
Right.
Or you realize there are factors that you weren't aware of. And so that was my initial thought on this idea of pursuing, striving after safety, that it's something that happens in our world, that the world is doing, oftentimes apart from God, which really makes it a hopeless pursuit, because it's just in this life you can get more or less safety, you can be more at risk or less at risk, but ultimately death is coming, right? Ultimately there's a danger. There are dangers in this world that are more powerful than us. And of course, when you think about it long enough, you realize, no, there are legitimate ways to pursue safety. God created us with just an innate desire to live, and so He gave you an appetite, and it's good to satisfy that appetite, but that's the means by which He sustains you. And so when you're cold, you put on a jacket. When you're thirsty, you take a drink of water. And so in that sense, we say there's some level of this pursuit of safety that is a good thing. Do you trust God, or do you take the medicine? Those two aren't in conflict with each other. The conflict or the opposite of trusting God is not trusting God, right? Taking medicine isn't the opposite of trusting God. So take the medicine.
That's a good point. Say that again for people, because I think that's something they have to ponder a little bit.
Yeah. So many times in conversations I've had with people about safety, the way that they will raise their question is, do I let my kid walk to school alone? Or no, how do they put it? They say, do I let my kid walk to school alone and trust God, or do I drive my kid to school? And I'm thinking, you can trust God while you're driving your kid to school.
Yeah, driving them doesn't mean you're going to get there safely, by the way.
Yeah. Or no, right. You could there could be a car accident, but you feel more in control when you're driving the kid, even if you're distracted and drinking coffee and you're on your cell phone, than you're letting the kid walk out the door alone. God's still in control, but you have less of a feeling of control. And so things like that are really hard to let go of. But trust God when you're taking the medicine, or trust God when you don't take the medicine. So we should always be trusting God. But we easily fall into that trap of thinking, do I take this practical step towards safety, or do I just trust God? And whether or not you take that practical step of safety is a question to ask, right? You're responsible for God, for how you live a life of faith, a life in obedience to Him. But whether you let your kid walk to school alone, or whether you drive them, trust God in both of those situations.
So what role does fear play? Because I'm thinking, okay, should I, does God put fear in me when there's something stupid I'm about to do, and so He implants fear in me? Is that because I'm a sissy and I just don't want to have any pain? Is fear something that I should listen to, or do you ignore fear and run through it?
Right. So fear is just a very primal emotion, and typically we don't choose to be afraid. It's something that happens to us.
Okay.
And so we just recognize that when certain things happen, you're afraid, even if you're a small child and you don't know why you should be afraid. When someone boo, it
Yeah.
says something big and loud,
Right.
it frightens you. And then the more we learn about the world about us, we can train ourselves, with what we're afraid of and what we are not afraid of. And so it seems like it would be a good thing to learn to be afraid in the right way. Sometimes theologians will talk about how do they put it, with fear, that there's a proper fear and there's improper fear. And you can think about that with anything. What's the difference between bravery and courage versus just stupidity and carelessness? And oftentimes those will look the same way. But yeah, I think we need to train ourselves to fear God. Obviously, that's the proper thing. And there are things in this life that can harm us, and there's a legitimate fear of those things, and it's proper to you put your hand on something hot and you pull it away. I think those things, that's good. God made us that way.
Yeah. I look at those things, and every once in a while, you think you need to encourage a young person to have more courage.
Yes.
Because new things, we have a zip line here at camp.
Yes.
And we have a climbing wall. Now, I've tried to climb the climbing wall. I have climbed it. My daughter was up here actually working the climbing wall one summer, and as I was climbing it, I am afraid of heights. For some reason, I start getting up there, and I do not like it.
Yes.
So I'm halfway up the wall, and my one leg is going like a sewing machine. I mean, it's automatic. I'm not trying to do that. And I look down, and I tell my daughter, "Okay, you can let me down now." She says no. She would not let me down until I made it all the way up.
And have you ever noticed that things that are new and unknown we are afraid of because we don't know.
Right.
And then you get more familiar with something and the fear decreases. And sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes that's a bad thing. If it's if it's a person deceiving you, or if it's sin, right, something that's going to cause you trouble, you shouldn't be too familiar with it. There should be kind of a fear or a repulsion of these dangers. I don't know if we talked about this in the last episode, but in the Psalms, it's interesting, some of the language that the psalmists will use about whether it's a stormy sea or an enemy or the wilderness, and they'll often express it with a lot of passion, like antipathy or hatred towards the things that are encroaching on their lives. And so I think that's legitimate, where there are there's just kind of raw fear. But if we think about it more on this level of, again, following the lead of the psalmists, God gave me this life. I want to live a life worshiping God and serving Him and following after Him. And there are these dangers that encroach on my ability to do that. And so I dislike those things. I don't want those things because life is good. Then that gets, I think, closer to how God would want our hearts to be formed in response to those more primal fears that we have.
I think of David and Goliath.
Yes.
I just think that story always has amazed me, because here's this kid. He sees the soldiers. They're all trained. They all hide when Goliath comes out here.
Yeah.
And his response is kind of like, "What are you doing? Who's going to go after him? Nobody. You're kidding me." Eventually, we know the story. He goes and he picks up some stones. And he runs at the guy. And I'm thinking, this boy just lost it. No, he didn't. He had been trained, as we talked about earlier. When he took care of sheep, he was faithful at taking care of sheep. Now, again, as he said, well, I took care of the bear, I took care of the lion. It's like, I wouldn't have done that either. I would have handed him a lamb. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
My whole demeanor would have been different, I think. So that's why I think I'm intrigued by the whole thing. Here's a young man that took his responsibility to take care of sheep very seriously.
Yes.
So God used it to show him there's some big challenges here, but you can trust me. Just do what's right. You're here to take care of the sheep. You know how to defend the sheep. Let's do it. Let's do the best you can, and trust me. Now, he picked up stones. To me, he picked up stones. That's what he knew how to use. He didn't know how to use bazookas or anything. They didn't even have them back then. But he knew how to use a stone. So it was kind of like, God, you're the one I trust. However, I'm still using what I know how to use, and yet I know it's inadequate. But I'm not really trusting the stones, but I'm still using the stones. I'm using a slingshot, and I want to see you win. And he wasn't afraid when he went forward.
Well, you know, one of the themes that I explore to some extent in the book is kind of this idea of skill and competence. And so when you look at our world, just kind of on our society on a basic level, how we seek to achieve safety, and oftentimes you will hear language of making something foolproof, which is interesting because in the Bible, you read the book of Proverbs, read the book of Ecclesiastes, and the wise man is much safer than the fool. So the fool doesn't avoid danger. The fool falls headlong into all sorts of problems, all sorts of traps and snares. And so I think that's a biblical indication that when we're trying to make safety foolproof, right, where any idiot could follow these directions or go through this procedure and there's not going to be a problem, we're missing out on, that idea of skill and wisdom and competence. And so David, God trained him with the skill and competence to go after a lion, to go after a bear, whatever might be attacking his sheep. And then he was ready when he faced Goliath to do those things. And so for us in the world we live in today, you think about young people, we have our NBI students, the young people that come here, and they are operating heavy machinery, that they're driving tractors, they're handling horses, they're lifeguarding down at the beach. So they're doing a lot of things. And I love that because they're being trained, they're facing real life situations where there's more than one thing going on, where decisions need to be made, where you need to be trained by the staff here on how to respond to this. And that just goes so far in kind of that desire, that pursuit of safety, to have some skills, to have some competence where you're ready to step in. And maybe Goliath, right? You've never faced Goliath before, but you've faced some smaller challenges that are preparing you for that.
As you're talking, I'm thinking, okay, we're talking about the importance of young people having experiences where they're faithful and God and we talked about that at the beginning of the program.
Yes.
Do you think today that parents have kind of taken a back seat and kids are not pushed at all in some of this areas of development and learning? It's like when kids even come to camp, sometimes I wonder if they've been out of the house at all, and everything. I mean, they get. I remember once I was down by the beach and I heard a blood-curdling scream, and of course that gets my attention. So I run towards it, and this girl's screaming, "I have a tick. There's a tick on me." And I started to laugh. No, I know, that was totally insensitive on my part. I have had thousands of ticks on me through the years. Yes, I understand Lyme's disease. Those of you that want to write me and tell me all the dangers, I understand all those dangers. I am also one who has worked in the woods with horses and worked in the woods for the past 57 summers, and I've had a few ticks. I wouldn't scream at them. I would take care of them. I know how to take care of them. I know how to take them off. I know how to watch for a problem. I know how to do all those things. But the idea of screaming bloody murder when you get bit, I don't even think she was bit by a tick. I think it was just on her. And yes, I do need to control my emotions and not laugh at something like that. But it went from one end to another for me, like someone who was dying down there and they got something happened to them, to it was a tick. And that's how all of us seem to be at times. There's things that maybe shouldn't frighten us, but they do because we're not trained at all in how to think.
Yeah, well, and that's a great example where you've been exposed to ticks long enough. My family, we just moved up to the North Woods, and we were a little on edge. We were a little heightened about ticks and Lyme disease and those sorts of things. And then as time goes on, you realize most of the time you catch the tick before it bites you, and you go through a process and you learn to just be watching for them and taking care of things. So for this girl, if she's just heard stories about it but has never actually confronted it, then we can understand the strong emotional reaction that she has. And then the hope would be the next time it happens, she knows a little bit more and can say, okay, there's a tick, but I can get rid of it. And I know reasonably what cautions I can take.
Yeah. Well, I love to encourage parents to encourage your kids to get out of their comfort zones as much as possible. Go and do things that maybe they've never done before. They're uncomfortable doing it first. let them learn how to do it.
Well, and you asked me the question earlier about parents exposing their children to risks and what have we done, and that of course is a really complicated question, and but some of the trains of thought that I've had related to that is that we're more likely to allow our kids to be exposed to a different set of risks than maybe a generation or two ago. So maybe a generation or two ago, kids would drive faster cars that were less safe, and they had less training in them on roads that were more poorly maintained, or they had more freedom in going around exploring the physical world around them. So maybe meeting strangers if you live in the city, maybe exploring the woods if you live in the woods, whatever that might be. And for a variety of reasons, we've become far less comfortable with giving our children freedom on that level. But then you think about other sorts of dangers, so not necessarily physical dangers, but relational, spiritual, emotional dangers, and we're a lot more likely to open our children up to a whole world of evil and dangers through their screens, for example, or through people that they're interacting with. And so I scratch my head on that one sometimes, and I think I can imagine in my mind a kid who can't go outside and ride his bike, but he can have the screen with all sorts of things on that. And I think to myself, a broken ankle would be far less damaging to this young man than the videos he's watching or the people he's following online. And so there's, for whatever reasons, variety of reasons, there are risks we're willing to expose our children to, and others that we have a heightened sense of resistance to.
I think that's an excellent point you just made there, because I don't think ever, no matter what's going to happen in the world, that the dangers are going to go away. As far as Satan's good at what he does, he knows how to capture us. He knows how to give us false fear. He knows he's good at it. Things have changed so dramatically. When I was a kid, it didn't seem like our parents were overly concerned about us getting sick.
Okay.
Someone got the measles, we all went over there to get them. Let's all get them and get it over with. We did it with the mumps. We did it with the measles. We did it. That was our vaccines back then. The one that they were pretty strict about was smallpox.
Okay.
Smallpox, they came up with a vaccine for it, and they actually put it in a sugar cube. And I was in Chicago, and the fire department gave it to you when you stopped by as a kid. They would give you the sugar cube with it in there so that everybody would get it. So it was a neighborhood thing, and everybody got vaccinated for polio. And I guess that's a pretty damaging disease. So in my perspective, when vaccines came out, even for COVID, I thought, I go back to polio. It worked. And so my thought was, well, what's wrong with vaccines? And now, boy, you say that, and you're all over the place now with whether vaccines should ever be used or not used or whatever else. I don't know how you fit vaccines into safety.
Yeah, smallpox is an interesting story, and if I remember the details, if you've ever seen, in medical textbooks, pictures of what smallpox does to a person, it's pretty bad. It's a devastating disease, and then basically a cure for it, or a very successful vaccination was developed, and I didn't know it was given through sugar cubes.
No, that was not smallpox. It was polio.
Okay. But however, the smallpox vaccine was administered to where smallpox has pretty much been completely eradicated.
Right.
And something like that gives you a lot of hope, because you say, you look at the world we live in, that there are dangers, and so you isolate the danger, and through technology, through research, through study, you figure out what the danger is, and you figure out what's a solution. How do we neutralize this? How do we solve this problem? And then you develop a system where there's money, there's certain expectations of, you go to the doctor and you get vaccinated, or I don't know what the official term for it would be, and then it's eradicated. And so that sort of optimistic thinking will spread. If you think about the modern era with the development of technology, certain medical procedures, all the advancements that we have. And smallpox was kind of a great example of the pattern that people hoped to set, to say, well, that's one disease, let's do that with all of the diseases. Right. And so oftentimes you'll find that optimism of let's look for these dangers and figure out how to eradicate them, and then we'll deal with that, and then we can kind of systematically go through and deal with all those various dangers. And so on one level, you could think about any sort of vaccine on that level. We know, I mean, the flu vaccine, it doesn't work quite the same way, because the flu is a very different disease than smallpox, and so you get a new flu shot every year, right. And sometimes it's more effective than others, but it's not an absolute thing. It's kind of in that gray area of probabilities. You'll probably get less sick if you take the flu vaccine, but no guarantees. And so that's one of the things that you just have to realize when you're thinking about safety, when you're thinking about risk, is that this world is messy. This world isn't always exactly predictable the way that we think it will go. And certainly with COVID vaccines, there were expectations. There was a lot of pressure and weight up and excitement even on what those vaccines were going to do, and then you realized you needed boosters and additional boosters, and they weren't as effective as many people had initially hoped they would be. And so you look back and I think you say, what's the harm of this disease? What's the risk, and what are the unknowns with the vaccine, and is it worth doing it or not? Right. And sometimes those are messy decisions to make.
It's one of those things I won't argue with people on. It's like, you know what, ultimately that could be a good thing for you, it could be a bad thing, I don't know. Yep. However, trust God. In the long run, you make a decision. My father-in-law, who is an old school doctor, used to tell us, just keep the basics. Wash your hands. Keep your fingers out of your nose, your ears, your eyes, your mouth. You'll probably be fine. And you know what? I found that to be true. You wash your hands. And he used to say, if the germ can't get in you, you're not going to get sick. So keep the germ from getting in you. And the quickest way it gets in you is through your hands somehow. And because I asked him one day why he wasn't sick all the time, because he treated sick people all day long, and he seemed to never be sick. He says, because I wash my hands in between each one. And I kind of laughed at him, because that's the basics. Just do the basics. And see what happens. And you can still get sick. And he did get sick eventually, at times. But, the bottom line is there are some basics you can do in life to be safe. They're all in line with what the scriptures talk about. Ultimately, you trust God and trust Him that He loves you. He's got a plan, and listen to Him. Get used to doing the basics well, I think, and go through what you have to go through as far as the tough stuff, and realize that God will equip you to do that. Well, this is Dave Wager, and I'm with Jeremy here at Younger Older, and we thank you for listening. Goodbye for now.